Firstly, this is now the third attempt he's had to explain his presence at this event. It's different every time, and I think people around the country cannot quite understand why the leader of the opposition cannot explain clearly what he was doing at this particular incident. I think that goes to trust and his competence. But does it matter? Look, you've explained it very well, Julia, but this incident was when what happened in 1972 was a brutal, pre-planned, premeditated attack on the Summer Olympic Games. Forget that these were Israeli athletes. These were terrorists who burst into the Olympic Village and killed brutally 11 athletes in the middle of the Olympic Games in the heart of the Olympic Village. It was one of the worst terrorist atrocities, certainly in the 70s, and is remembered by the entirety of the sporting world. Now, the distasteful thing about this whole event is that Jeremy Corbyn has made no apology whatsoever for having been present at an event at which the perpetrators of that brutal act were honoured.
Now, this is it, exactly. He was a backbench MP. No one really cared what he did. In fact, he used to spend quite a lot of time. I mean, he spent most of his time going to conferences and ceremonies involving some very, very, very questionable characters.
Talked about it, well, he was just a humble backbencher. I mean, this was in 2013, 2014, by which time Jeremy Corbyn had been a member of Parliament for over 20 years. And although he was a backbencher, he had previously considered standing for the leadership of the Labour Party, and just a year later he would indeed stand for the leadership of the Labour Party and become the leader. So this is not some naive young backbench MP. This is somebody who knew exactly what he was doing, and I have no problem with him being a strong, passionate supporter of the rights of the Palestinian people. But the Jewish community has a major problem with him appearing so vividly to be prepared to honour the memory of the perpetrators of one of the most brutal terrorist attacks, not just to hit the state of Israel, but to hit the sporting world and, in fact, the world in general.
It's now quite clear that despite Jeremy Corbyn's, initial protestations and despite the protestations of his supporters, Labour is a party which is now thoroughly riddled with anti-Semitism and, frankly, a hatred of Israel. Very much, lies at the heart of that anti-Semitism, and so Jeremy Corbyn's, history of happily rubbing shoulders with people who, as I said, terrorists who murdered Israelis, is obviously a part of that.
But this is the thing, isn't it? You can be very critical of Israel's policies. You can be very supportive of the Palestinian people. But one thing you can't do is support the hostage taking, let's be honest, the horrific torture. The details we won't go into at 8:15 in the morning. Horrific torture and killing, the massacre of these Israeli Olympians in the village, in the Olympic Village back in 1972. I mean, and which is what he was effectively commemorating, the people who did that, which is utterly bizarre. But just finally, Dan Hodges, I mean, is any of this going to have any effect on the polls, on Jeremy Corbyn's chances of remaining as leader of the Labour Party, going into the next election, possibly even winning the next election? Certainly the polls we see now, I mean, certainly we've got a government that's massively in disarray, a hugely unpopular Tory Prime Minister and Tory leader. But is any of this actually denting Jeremy Corbyn's support among those who've already pledged support for a man who doesn't have the support of the majority of his MPs?
Yes, I think it is actually. I mean, obviously, in terms of the polls, we have to wait and see. I mean, it's quite interesting. There was a poll out last week that showed that despite, obviously, all the crisis within the Conservative Party and all the issues Theresa May is facing, that Labour's support and Jeremy Corbyn's personal support amongst the public had fallen back quite significantly. And the only issue that anybody could attribute that to was this ongoing anti-Semitism crisis.
I think I needed to educate myself more in certain areas for food. When you're cooking and if your child says it's hungry, okay, go ahead. If we were not living in the deprived home, if it's there, you want to have it. But I didn't, obviously, would never have expected him to be the size he is. So,
and you say there's something that just crept up. So he was a perfectly normal-sized baby, and then just gradually got fatter and fatter. What is he?
He was £9.4, and if you look at the pictures, he was fine, and he was like a bit chubby, which that was normal.
Yeah.
And then I think I listened to more people who were saying, don't worry, he'll grow out of it. And instead, I should have listened to the few that say, well, actually, no, you need to do something about it. I went for the majority, and that's my mistake.
Okay. Look, babies are supposed to be chubby. It's how they keep themselves safe, and it's of course if they get ill, they can survive better. The point is that once they start running and walking and being physically active, that weight falls off them.
No, he wasn't chubby as a baby. I'm talking chubby like when he was about 5, 6. It was fine. He blended it. That was when I was like, oh, okay.
Okay.
And that's kind of where it kind of crept in slowly from there.
So in terms of why, once you've recognised there's a problem, and again, I really do applaud you for that you're not saying nothing to do with me, I don't know where you got the food from. You and your other half, you bought the food, you put it in the cupboards, you put it on the table, you put it in his hand, you put it in his mouth. 16 years old, it's difficult to keep track of what they eat. They can go off to the chicken shop after school. 10 years old, you know what they're eating, you're in control of it. So I really applaud you for at least being honest about that. But at the point when you realise there's a problem, why does he need to go to a weight loss camp? Why does he need to have surgery of any sort? Surely the solution is simply start feeding him the right amount of food and the right kind of food, and that weight will fall off him.
Which we are doing. Can I just make it clear that I did not go and ask for surgery. There was no conversation of surgery.
That's what the NHS offered.
What I need to make clear is, firstly, I'm not slating the NHS.
For decades and decades, Hollywood has discriminated, and not just Hollywood, but Hollywood has discriminated against gay, lesbian, trans actors and actresses. And when a role is finally created that fits that billing, not giving it to one of the LGBT actors who would be fantastic to play it, and instead giving it to someone like Jack Whitehall, who, no offence to him, is not a blockbuster star he's acted in one movie, Bad Education. There are dozens of gay actors out there.
Well, we're talking. No, there are millions of people who want to be actors. Can I ask you, Josh? It sounds like you're sitting in a cupboard. We've got terrible echo on that. I think we could try and improve that line. We do our best. But you say Hollywood's discriminated against gay actors. Well, I mean, look, society discriminated against gay actors. We've had hundreds of very, very, very successful gay actors and actresses. Unfortunately, they've had to keep their sexuality a secret from the public to still be box office hits, which is a terrible, great shame and tells us a lot about society over the years. But the times are changing. But I still don't understand why, if there's a gay character, does a gay person have to play that? Does that mean that gay people shouldn't be allowed to play straight characters?
That would be discriminating against...
Well, no. It's exactly the same logic, Josh.
No, Julie, you're trying to...
Can I say my name's Julia, not Julie, by the way?
Sorry, you are trying to ignore centuries of historical discrimination and pretend that we're all equal now. And
pretend we are all equal now. Under the law, we're all equal.
Yes, but in terms of society, in terms of the way that people treat each other, for instance, when you were introducing us and you said that gender fluid people, whatever that is, that is not against the law, but that is still discrimination.
It's not discrimination. I don't know. I think it just means nothing to me.
That's fine. Maybe you should.
That's why I said whatever that is.
About gender fluid people.
We talk about these topics on my show all the time. It still doesn't make any sense to me. A lot of concerns that this is someone who came to this country, has been given a life in this country, but has turned on this country. If it is the case that this is a terror attack, a lot of concern that perhaps we are not carrying out the right sort of controls on the people who are allowed to come here and certainly to get British citizenship.
We face a tremendous task. There are so many individuals on a list that could be added to a list for at least a preliminary investigation, and that's in the thousands. And what we're trying to do is filter down through thousands to try and find out the few that are actively planning, the few that are connecting and making networks, the few that are determined enough and have resources or will get resources to carry an attack. It is an unenviable job, because when they get it right, it hardly makes the news. It just talks about people arrested. When they get it wrong, it all goes wrong. Today, as in yesterday, a lot of it now is investigatory. Where did the car come from? Where did it pause? Where did it stop? How long was it in the area? Allegedly 90 minutes, well, much longer overnight. Where was the driver looking at? Did he panic when the ambulance came up behind him and he saw flashing lights? Is that what triggered him to carry out, which was in effect I don't mean this for the sake of the cyclist, a very ineffective attack.
Yeah.
Because he's in a small car, he runs over some cyclists, brushing them aside, and then races towards a barrier which is rated to stop much heavier vehicles at much higher speeds, and he was never going to get anywhere. So there's all of that to try and find his motivation, to try and find how did he drive into London? Was there somebody in the passenger seat? Was there somebody with him as his if it is jihad, was there somebody there with him, encouraging him to carry out the attack?
But invariably, when these appear to be lone wolf attacks, and this certainly appears to be something in the sort of the Four Lions territory in terms of competence, but we invariably find out that lone wolves, we had this with the Nice attack, it was a lone wolf, hadn't been radicalised, and then we find out that actually these people often have been radicalised for months on end, many other, in contact with many others who have been radicalised. Is it just a case of just yet another one slipping through the net? Realistically, we're never going to stop the practicalities of how someone can attack us or where they can attack us. We can move it around. We can make it so people bomb train stations or use cars as opposed to using aeroplanes, by upping airport security. But fundamentally, isn't the issue that we need to tackle the fact that we have thousands of people living in this country, some from abroad, some born here, largely born here actually, who wish us ill and wish to kill us?
You're absolutely right. That is the point that we've got to get to, that we don't have those people willing to do that. However, let me come back to all the points you've just made. So, as part of my role, we were making train stations safer. You can't drive a vehicle onto any of our train stations now, so that becomes safer. We were doing work with the fertiliser industry to make fertiliser weaker. We were doing work with the pharmaceutical industry to make all the ingredients you need to make a bomb much more difficult. Now,
and to flag up when people did purchase.
And what that does, it puts tripwires in, so it gives people the opportunity to catch people that are in the process of making a bomb. We've made it more difficult to get guns. We've done all sorts of things.
Lots of interception of what's going on.
Yeah,
online.
you wouldn't believe some of the work that's gone on in the background that no one really knows about to actually keep ourselves a little bit safer. Now, you can never stop the threat completely. Yeah. Absolutely not.
And especially lone wolves, especially unsophisticated attacks.
And me and you could get into a vehicle now and go and knock people over and become terrorists. So you're never going to be able to stop that.
It sounds to me that, Madeleine Moon, that you are unable to say that you think that Jeremy Corbyn is a fit man to be Prime Minister of this country. What does that say if you are an MP in a party led by a man that you think is not fit to be the Prime Minister of this country?
Yeah, I think you're putting words into my mouth.
You've declined twice to answer my question. Do you or do you not think he is fit to be Prime Minister of this country? It's a simple question. I know the answer to it. Well, I think a lot of people listening will know their answer. Do you, as a Labour MP, believe that when you happily at the next election, like every other MP, run on a manifesto which would effectively put Jeremy Corbyn into number 10 if you win?
And what I've said to you is, you stand on a manifesto, not an individual.
But you know that the effect of a Labour majority will be Jeremy Corbyn in number 10. I'm asking, is he a fit man to be Prime Minister of this country? It's a simple question. I think it's a fairly simple answer.
Well, I think it's a much more complicated question than the one that you're posing. And I'm saying the Labour Party is more than one person.
It is, but the Prime Minister isn't more than one person. The Prime Minister is the person who leads the political party. You're an MP of a political party which has Jeremy Corbyn as its elected leader. Twice he's been elected. There's no evidence that he's going to be deselected or not elected again if there is a challenge against him. He's going to be, if Labour win a majority at the next general election, Jeremy Corbyn will be the next Prime Minister of this country. Do you or do you not think he is a fit person to be Prime Minister of this country?
As I've said, I stand on a Labour Party manifesto. That's the important thing. What is the Labour Party saying it's going to do? Leadership of parties come and go. Theresa May has faced numerous threats that her party are going to deselect her because they don't think that she's fit. Yeah. She's still there.
OK, we'll leave it there.
This narrative about is it the only thing that matters in education, it is time to change that. I did terribly in one of my A-levels, absolutely failed my French. I got an A in English, a B in General Studies, a D in History. That then was enough to get me into a good university. Now, I'd struggle, to be honest. I really would.
Can I just say there's been some guffawing in the studio about you studying General Studies, just so you know.
Those were the days.
Those were the days.
Everyone did it. And frankly, that was a lifesaver for me because it got me into a university.
Yeah.
And I kind of discovered I loved a subject which I hadn't been quite so interested in when I was younger.
We're seeing, bizarrely, biology A-level, you can get 55% and still get an A grade. Can an employer, or indeed a university admissions tutor, really read anything into the grades that young people are getting these days? Do they really tell us anything about how good or how hard-working that student is?
Well, I think the first point to make is I don't think there were employers or parents or teachers or students who were lining up saying we need to reform A-levels, they're too easy. So I think quite a lot of us think that a lot of time has been spent talking about rigour and hearing government ministers talking about rigour. And you're absolutely right that what has happened by the regulator is to make sure that this year's standards overall are the same as last year's standards. Now, I think parents would probably agree with me that they don't want their child to be a guinea pig in a new system and to see standards fall through the floor. So we kind of understand that. But if you're introducing new courses and saying these are more difficult, then you would expect that you're not overall going to get exactly the same pass mark. And it's a sign of the kind of Alice in Wonderland world we live in, where we talk endlessly about qualifications and statistics and forget that actually education should be about other things as well, which are going to help you to do well in life. The advice to young people is, however it feels today, whether you're going through clearing or whether you're not going through clearing, whether you've got the grade you need, my experience as being ahead for all of those years is even though it feels like the bottom has fallen out of your world because you haven't got into your top university, that happened to lots of us. It happened to me. And you suddenly find yourself, given good advice, going to a different place or on a different course, a different pathway, and often that works out as being the best thing in your interest.
Parents want their kids to have good grades. The teachers want them to have good grades. It makes them look better. Head teachers, the university. It's in everyone's interest, apart from the poor sods who in a few years' time have to employ these people and are trying to work out whether or not they've got any qualifications that are worthwhile employing.
Well, one of the big things that's going on at the moment is that there's a huge concern among inspectors that, schools are teaching to the test, that everybody's become obsessed with exam scores, with A-level results, with GCSE scores, and that all those other qualities that you need to thrive in life are actually being neglected, So art, music, drama, sport, all those things that teach you how to work in teams, how to be creative, how to follow your passions if you're not very academic. Yeah. They're being neglected in our schools. And the worry is that we're turning out kids who, yes, can regurgitate a mark scheme, but can they actually cope in a workplace? Do they have those skills to really thrive in the workplace? And I feel terrible because all those A-level students out there today picking up their grades have worked incredibly hard. They
haven't all. They have. Can we stop? Can we stop this complete nonsense? Not everyone has done well. Not everyone is clever, and not everyone works hard. Can we all just stop this madness?
But lots of them getting very good grades today have done very well,
yes.
and some of them not getting very good grades, but getting the best that they could get have done well.
This is it. You see,
today.
When I did my A levels, and we're talking about what was it back in 1987, that I can distinctly remember. I had really good friends at Sixth Form College, and being really delighted because they got their 3 Cs, and that was what they'd been aiming for. And they'd worked really hard, and they did really well, and we were congratulating other people who got different grades. And there was absolutely at that time really no expectation that everyone was just walking around with A grades.
The fact is, we did not know what the deal the UK population was signing on to back in 2016.
But we never know. I mean, we don't get a final say on trade negotiations when we do them with America or Japan. We haven't had. The British public leave that to the government.
Other countries do, and one could strongly and correctly argue that the most democratic thing is for people to have a say. I mean, one of the major arguments behind Brexit in the first place is we never signed up to this. We signed up for a simple trade agreement in 1974, and it became something different. Right now, we have an opportunity to actually have a say on what our new relationship with the EU is going to be, and I think it's undemocratic to argue that we shouldn't get one.
No deal isn't a particular problem for me. I was in favour of Brexit at the time. I said no deal would be okay. I mean, not the best, but perfectly acceptable.
I'm perfectly happy with no deal, I have to say. Femi, that's definitely your worst case scenario.
It's a very, very privileged position to be able to say that no deal is acceptable, because no deal means that the 1.4 million British people that are living on the other side of the channel would have no right to live in their own homes. Their right to live in their own homes.
No, it doesn't. That's a load of nonsense.
Please listen. Their right to live in their own homes is based on their EU citizenship. That's the right that they have to live in those countries. Now, if you take that away, that disappears.
Why on earth?
We are not going to have 1.4 million people evacuated.
Femi, I'll bet my house on that. Well, by the way, just one final point. Carol Ann Collins, after I tweeted out that you were coming on to talk about this, Femi, tweeted out, try not to be abusive to Femi, Julia, if that is at all possible for you. He's a polite and civil young man. You are indeed a very polite, civil young man. Have I ever been abusive to you?
People underestimate how well we get on.
I know.
We have a functional relationship.
A functional relationship. There will be adequate food and we have a functional relationship. That's the best we can say about Brexit. A lot of students this morning they're actually, whether they get their grades or not, they're in the lucky position that basically it's a buyer's market for universities today, isn't it? Because there are lots of places available in clearing and because of the demographics, there are fewer students who are applying to university. So if you don't get your grades, it's not all lost.
Well, yeah. So first, look, congratulations to everybody for what they've achieved. It's a big day for young people and indeed their families. You know, it's the culmination of 14 years of schooling. But you're also right to say that for those who haven't quite got what they were, what they needed, what they were looking for, there are opportunities out there. You know, in clearing every year, tens of thousands of people go through clearing, and we'll find a course that's good for them.
When it comes to the A grades, we always hear so much about the A grades. Of course, you know, most students don't get A grades, certainly not across the board. But last year, 26.3% of A level scored an A or an A star. Big concern from universities that the A star was introduced because there were so many pupils getting A grades. Now, I mean, you're roughly the same age as me. In our day, a very, very small fraction of people got those A grades. What percentage roughly of youngsters should be getting an A grade? What would be the right percentage for the marks, so A grade marks to be awarded at?
Well, I don't think you can get into a question exactly in that way. What you need to make sure is that the grading system is designed so that it differentiates between people appropriately. So yes, it does, acknowledge, it does note those that have reached the required standard, but also kind of at the top end, which is what you're talking about, that there's enough stretch so that those who've really, really worked very hard and have really, done impressively in their studies, that can be acknowledged as well. That's why, for example, in GCSE, when we're bringing in the new grading system, there are more grades at the top end than previously in order exactly to reflect that.
Absolutely fantastic. Congratulations to you, Abigail. Can I say, my sister went to Warwick. You're going to have an absolute hoot there. It's a party city.
Thank you.
Well, shall I not have said that in front of Mr. Coolbeck?
No, it's fine.
Listen, huge congratulations, though. You arrived with no qualifications. You did your GCSEs sort of after 16 then, and then have gone on to get 3 Bs at A-level.
Yeah.
That is absolutely magnificent. That is so impressive. Really, really congratulations to you. What are you going to do to celebrate?
Well, me and my family are probably going to celebrate today.
Oh, don't do it with the family. Don't involve them.
No, because it's my brother's birthday as well, so we're just going to celebrate together. Yeah.
Oh, fair enough. Well, if we could come back to Mr. Coolbeck, and I'm like you, Ross Kemp, so as soon as I talk to a head teacher, it's Mr. Coolbeck. I mean, you must be incredibly proud of Abigail and all the pupils. We spoke to some of your other students who got some 2 A's and a B, 2 A's and a C, doing very, very well. But the key message that's going out to young people opening their exam results today is that, it's a buyer's market. Get on to clearing if you don't get the results. You may already have found out you're into the university of your choice before you even get your results under this rather strange new UCAS system when you find that out. But there is every chance you're going to get it if you want to go to university, that you will get onto a good course somewhere, because those places are available.
Absolutely. We're really, really proud of Abigail. Abigail is a star for us because she did come here with nothing and she hadn't had such a great time at school. And I like to think we turned her around, although she turned herself around, and she's been an absolute credit to us. So that's the first thing I want to say. But also I want to say, it is a buyer's market, it appears. Many of our students, the ones who have done really well, are pleased they're getting into their places, but we're also getting students getting into their second choices if they haven't done so well. And we've got people here, my staff are here, working with students to give them advice and build them up if they haven't done so well.
Excellent stuff.
So congratulate them.
This is a war that nobody is going to win, because on the one side you have Trump launching these relentless war of words against the media, calling them enemies of the people, saying that it's all fake news. And he comes off as paranoid, illiberal. And I do think that kind of language from the most powerful man in the US, in the world, in fact, is quite threatening to press freedom. On the other side, though, you have, as your guest Peter says, you have the media completely playing into his hands by partaking in this war of words. And I think that could backfire, because one concern that Trump supporters have is that there is this media class that is completely out of touch, doesn't understand them. And I think this kind of action could just prove that to those supporters of Trump. I think there is a good critique to be made of the modern American media and the American press, and the double standards they deploy, the fact that they treated Obama much more softly than they treat Trump.
Particularly deportations. I mean, anything that Donald Trump does is considered awful, but the fact that Obama was carrying out exactly the same policies didn't bother them at all.
Exactly. There's the deportations. There's the fact that Obama bombed 7 countries. There's the fact that he also instituted quite strict rules about who could come to the US from certain Muslim-majority countries. All that stuff was either glossed over or treated as normal when it was done by Obama. But when Trump does it, the press in America and around the world says it's the return of fascism, he's the new Hitler. So there is a double standard. There is a failure to hold to account all politicians equally. And that does come off to Trump supporters as evidence that the media is involved in some, either a political conspiracy or is just very casually anti-Trump in a very thoughtless way. So I think Trump is certainly wrong to always attack the media, and certainly to use language about like enemies of the people about the press. But the press also does need to have a look in the mirror and ask itself whether it's been genuinely fair and balanced in the way it reports American politics.
It's about sex, isn't it? It's when somebody is not a family member or someone who could be a sexual partner.
Not necessarily. I mean, there are scholars who say in our culture, in Britain, for instance, depends on your situation. If it's in emergency cases, you can.
But fundamentally, it comes down to men and women should not have any physical contact, because physical contact between men and women is somehow intrinsically sexual or could lead to something sexual. That's what it's about, though, isn't it?
Possibly, and well, I mean, if you actually look now by shaking hands, there's been a number of studies. There's to show that it shows some sort of dominance. For example, you must have heard of Donald Trump when he was shaking.
Yeah, but not for most people. It's just a way of establishing really contact.
I mean, people, it should be left up to people. It should be their decision. So she chose not to. That was her decision.
Oh, no. But this is now, Amra, you said it should be their decision whether they shake hands or not. He wanted to shake hands, as is the normal custom in Sweden and in the UK. She didn't want to shake hands. Why does her wish? Why does that override his wish?
I mean, if he wants to shake hands and she doesn't, people should decide. I mean, she could have chosen that on the spur of the moment to shake hands. And as far as I'm concerned, Islamically, there wouldn't be anything wrong with it. That's for people to decide.
But this is the thing. I mean, my view is, were it in the Quran or not in the Quran, whatever any scholars say, the reality is the customs of Western Europe require people to shake hands with people of the opposite sex. You might choose not to kiss. No, they do. Now, the job she was applying for was to be an interpreter. Now, presumably, in all these cases, she's going to be meeting new people all the time as a normal, friendly, professional greeting in the workplace. People shake hands. The fact that she would not do that, and would probably, do you not think that would make her pretty unemployable, regardless of how well she could interpret language?
I work in all sorts of places, and not everybody. I mean, perhaps at the interview, yes, but not normally. I mean, people come and say hello and go past you. You don't always shake hands with people.
When you're formally introduced to somebody, you shake hands with them. Very few black pupils actually get the grades where they can even think about applying to these top universities. And actually, in Oxford, the statistics for Oxford actually showed that there is actually a slight positive discrimination. You're more likely to get in as a black student than a white student of those who apply. But you've got a tiny percentage going to the sort of schools to get the sort of A-level grades they're getting. Very few actually getting those grades, and very few who then even apply to those universities. So when you say these colleges should be taking, or these universities should be taking more of these pupils, how can they take a pupil who didn't apply, who got C grades?
No, well, you can't take a person that doesn't apply and who get C grades. That's not my point, Julie. You know it isn't. What I'm saying is that those that do get the grades are still not getting through in proportionate numbers. And one of the obstacles as well is that, one, they're not getting through, but as you also suggested, that some people are not even applying because they know the financial barriers. I mean,
well, there's no wait. There's no bigger financial barrier to go to Oxbridge as there is to go to London Metropolitan University.
a young man contacted me, Roy Saleri, and he's got a place at Keble College, Oxford, but he's struggling with the costs. And so he's opened a GoFundMe, Hackney to Oxford. And this is some of the challenges that these young black men and women
No, but Simon, there is no greater cost to go to Oxford or Cambridge than there is to go to any other university.
No, well, there is in regards to not just the fees, but also the living conditions. And of course...
Living conditions. Most Oxford and Cambridge colleges now you can live in all 3 years. They've made a massive big point of that to keep the cost down. And there are plenty of scholarships and bursaries.
Whether it's Oxford or any other colleges. So the task to get in there in the first place, as you suggested, is huge. And then when you find yourself there, that you cannot really afford the cost, and so you've got to go to a GoFundMe, like this young man Roy has, is a problem that Stormzy is addressing.
Do you believe that the British history of and principles of free speech are under attack, or is this all just a complete storm in a teacup?
Well, people will say it's not a free speech issue, it's because he said it, and it's particularly the way he said it. But of course, that sends the message that, you know, only certain people are allowed to comment or allowed fair comment. And also, it's partly the fact that he's, white, male and stale, and that he's a powerful person. But I think...
he's middle-aged, white, posh, and man. I mean, he's not allowed to comment on anything anymore.
And on that basis, I think that one thing that we ought to be clear about, the majority of Muslims have not made a fuss about this. This has actually come from a very small... if you want, it's the kind of chattering classes who've got into a state about it. When you've got kind of broadcasters going all over, the country, interviewing women who are wearing the niqab or the burqa and saying, do you know somebody's been horrible about you and compared you to a letterbox or compared you to a bank robber? And then they say, oh, that's not very nice. And then people say, look, it's terrible. Look what's happening. In other words, it's been completely kind of talked up. And that's how it becomes a freedom of speech issue. Many women who are Muslims have been fighting and arguing against the burqa and the niqab for some time. It's not a demand put by the Quran or any kind of religious diktat. And so I only make those points because the fact that when somebody writes an article, it can be turned into such a you can't say that story, it does mean that the rest of us are left in a position of feeling that we're being told to shut up, to not ask awkward questions. And although, there's a particular issue here, we do know that there are issues that we might want to discuss in relation to any religion and obviously in relation to Islam, because precisely we've been told we can't. So we've had a problem, and we have a problem in Europe of radical Islam and with devastating, brutal consequences.
Even if it is the case that your poll is true and that there is now a majority for remaining in the EU, what good is that? We had the vote. We were told it was a once-in-a-lifetime vote and that the government would implement the decision. Everyone on the Remain and the Leave side agreed that. Why does that change anything?
Well, firstly, I'm not sure everyone did agree that. You had Jacob Rees-Mogg on the telly saying, let's have a double referendum, one to start and find out what the cause should be, and one to kind of decide on whether to actually go through with it when we see the result. And I think, a lot of people...
He wasn't a leader of the Leave campaign. There was an official campaign, and they were for both sides. The Prime Minister was very clear. He spent £9.3 million of taxpayers' money sending us a leaflet which said specifically the government will implement your decision. It wasn't, or we might have another vote in a couple of years' time and then we'll maybe do best of 5 and then we might implement the decision. It was, we will implement your decision.
I think the point is, if the tide of change is turning in public opinion, what is the morally right thing to do? Is it actually democratic to go ahead if the polls are saying consistently over a year that people are changing their minds? It's a genuinely problematic question. And I think some people have come to the conclusion that given it is a 2-year process, we haven't left yet. We have the right to the deal we currently have until March. It would seem perfectly reasonable to say, if the government comes back with a deal, let's compare it to what we've got and may the best deal win.
I know the Remain side are all in cahoots on this. You want to have 3 options, don't you? So there's Remain, and then there's leave with the deal and leave without a deal, rather cunningly splitting the option of leaving into 2. And what a surprise, Remain will win.
Julia, I'm surprised to hear you say that as a Democrat, because if you had a vote on leave versus a deal versus no deal, what would you say to the 53% that want to stay in? That in itself wouldn't be democratic. At best for Britain,
I'd say we've already had that debate 2 years ago.
I'd say, what does she want to use taxpayers' money to have a referendum every year? Every time someone changes their mind? No, I think it's a load of claptrap, to be honest with you. And she discussed this new wave polling, which the YouGov used, which was more accurate. But the difference was the YouGov sample was 50,000, there was 15,000, which works out about 23 people per constituency. Now, in my own constituency, this isn't what I'm hearing on the ground. You know, I've had more emails since the Chequers paper came out, in support for a no deal. And I haven't found a constituent yet who's actually, as you said yourself, Julia, changed their mind, who did vote Brexit and now going to remain.
Do you think that if there is any negative move towards Brexit by the British populace, it's actually down to the handling of it? And if it had been handled differently, if we'd had an inspiring leader talking about the positives, making a really strong case, doing strong negotiation, the country may well have united about this now.
I think it's several aspects, actually. I mean, I can't disagree with what you just said, but I think there's several aspects. Number one, when you've got organisations, like Eloise's organisation and who commissioned the poll in the first place, they are very much typical like the EU. They want to keep, having referendums until they get the answer that they want. So, and let's face it, a lot of media out there are very pro-Remain, so it's they're trying to influence. Also, we've got the second element as well, where in Parliament it doesn't necessarily reflect what that people voted to leave in the country. So we've got people thwarting the process, as we've seen. But the third element, yes, I mean, I said in the 1922 committee, I stood up there when there was difficult votes going through back in June. I asked the Prime Minister, look, once we've got through the next couple of weeks of votes, can we start having a positive post-Brexit vision for our country? Because people are crying out for this positive leadership.
The Brexit Briefing on Talk Radio. Get the broader perspective, only with The Times and The Sunday Times.